Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, How to Reach Your College Savings Goals with a 529 Plan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to see that we have a great turnout. Just want to do a quick audio check, make sure everyone can hear me. If you wouldn't mind, maybe just sending a note in the chat box if you cannot hear me, just to make sure that the audio is working. Okay,
Yep,
great, thank you. So I'm Katie Flynn from savingforcollege.com, and joining me today is Matt Toner from GradVisor, and we'll be discussing 529 plans and the best ways to save for college. Before we get started, I want to make a quick announcement about our sponsor. This webinar is brought to you today by College Savings Bank, a division of Next Bank SSB, and they are the program manager for the unique FDIC insured Arizona Family College Savings Program, the bank plan, and Indiana's College Choice CD 529 Savings Plan, which are both offered nationwide. You do not have to be an Arizona resident or an Indiana resident to use those plans. And focused on college savings since 1987, College Savings Bank is designed to help individuals and families save for higher education in a principal-protected, tax-advantaged way, and they offer valuable features including tax-deferred growth, generous contribution limits, and a variety of attractive FDIC-insured products. In addition, there are no fees and no income limits or age limits for the beneficiaries and or to open an account. So, just wanted to get started then on today's presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type that right into the question box in the control panel. And just pay attention, there might be two different ways to contact us. There's the chat box and the Q&A box, and we'd like all the questions to go in the Q&A box. And we're gonna do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the hour. But of course, if your question doesn't get answered, please feel free to visit our forum. That's forum, F-O-R-U-M, .savingforcollege.com. And then we'll also be sending an email after the presentation with a chance for you to give us some feedback, and that will also have a recording of the presentation. So take a quick second, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you, and let us know if there's anything else you'd like to see from savingforcollege.com. And then what we'll cover today, we're going to talk about different ways you can save for college or private K through 12 school. And then Matt's going to go into why we think a 529 plan is the best way to save for education. Matt will also go over how to select the right 529 plan for your family. I'll get into how 529 plans affect financial aid and some tips for grandparents. And then I'll conclude with the best way to withdraw from your 529 plan when it's time to pay for college. So let's start by talking about the different ways to save for college. According to Sally May's 2018 How America Saves for College report, 22% of families save for college in a regular savings account. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. Any savings is better than no savings. Regular savings accounts are very safe, but they have low interest rates and no tax benefits. That same survey showed that 14% of parents use a mutual fund or other investment accounts, which is a little bit better. You'll get hopefully higher returns on an investment account, but most of these accounts are taxable. So for today's presentation, we're going to focus on the tax advantage ways that families can use to save for education. So as we compare the savings options, we're going to take a look at 529 plans, Coverdell education savings accounts, Roth IRAs, which is a retirement account, and custodial accounts under UGMA, which is the Uniform Gift to Minors Act and the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. These are all tax advantage accounts that can be used to save for college, but 529 plans do offer some unique benefits. The first one is that you can change the beneficiary. So if your child decides they don't want to go to college, changes their mind, you have leftover funds, you always have that option to make a tax-free beneficiary change. And then also, 529 plans have the least amount of restrictions. So with a Coverdell, you can only contribute $2,000 per year per beneficiary, which you might not be able to save as much as you need with that low contribution limit. And then same with a Roth IRA, you're only allowed to contribute $6,000 or $7,000 if you're over 50 in 2019. On the other hand, 529 plans, they have what's called aggregate contribution limits, which are determined by the state that sponsors the 529 plan. And this amount is going to be based on the cost of 4 years of a college education at a private school. So in California, for example, this limit is $529,000. And then, of course, some of these accounts have income limits. So if you earn too much money, then you are not eligible for these tax benefits. But 529 plans, again, anyone can use them. There are no income limits, never too rich or never too poor. Another thing to point out are the investment options. So with a 529 plan, you're going to be limited to what the program offers. A Roth IRA will allow you to self-direct your investments in some cases, but with a 529, you're going to have a choice of portfolios that are put together by the investment managers that the 529 plan hires. So these are investment managers whose main objective is to maximize your college savings. So while you don't get that choice of the self-directed investments, you're going to get an investment that's designed to maximize your child's college savings. And Matt will go into that in a little bit more detail in a later slide. A couple other unique benefits of 529 plans over these other options are that some states offer state income tax benefits. Your state might offer a state income tax credit or a state income tax deduction for your contributions, which is not available with these other options. And then also 529 plans accept gift contributions. So many people are taking advantage of this feature and crowdfunding their college savings. And this can be done through your plan's gifting platform, or there's also some other services available now like College Backer or UNest. So if you're thinking about how to save for college, another important feature you want to think about is the qualified expenses. These are going to be different depending on which account you use. So make sure you know which expenses are qualified with the account that you're using, because only the withdrawals used to pay for qualified expenses are going to be eligible for those tax savings. So for example, a non-qualified withdrawal from a 529 plan is going to be subject to ordinary income tax and a 10% penalty on the earnings portion. That's only the earnings portion. Of course, what you put in, your contributions, will never be taxed or penalized. But this won't happen if you stick to just using the funds on the qualified expenses. So with the 529 plan, it's going to include most of your college expenses. There's a broad range, including tuition, fees, books, computers, room and board if the student is enrolled at least half-time. And this can even be an off-campus apartment. That's a question we get a lot. I know all students aren't going to be living in the dorms forever. So if your child wants to live in an off-campus apartment, what you would do is you would get the cost of attendance figures from the financial aid office, and you can withdraw up to the amount that the school allows for that the school budgets for financial aid from your 529 plan tax-free. And then also starting late 2017, you can withdraw up to $10,000 tax-free to pay for tuition at private, public, or religious elementary and high schools. And keep in mind, this is tuition only. Unlike with college, you can pay for more than just tuition. With the K through 12 expenses, it's only tuition, and it's $10,000 per year per beneficiary. And that does not include preschool, that does not include daycare, and it does not include homeschool. So that's strictly K through 12 for the 529 plans. A Coverdell Education Savings Account is going to have a broader range of expenses when it comes to K through 12 expenses. So you are eligible to take tax-free withdrawals for what's called qualified elementary and secondary expenses. And the IRS defines those as books, supplies and equipment, and academic tutoring required in connection with attendance or enrollments at the school. And also in some cases, you might also be able to pay for room and board, uniforms, transportation, and sometimes even extended day programs. So with that Coverdell, you get a little more flexibility if you are paying for K through 12 expenses. And then with a custodial account, those are the UGMA accounts, there's really no restrictions. These are financial accounts that are open for a minor at a bank, credit union, or brokerage firm. And the tax benefit there is that the first $1,050 of unearned income will be tax-free. The next $1,050 is taxed at the child's rate. And then after that, any income tax is taxed at the rates that apply to estates and trusts. So depending on how much income the account earns, that could be anywhere from $2,550 all the way up to $12,500. So again, this funds can be used on anything for the benefit of the minor, including college. But the kicker here is that when the child turns legal age, which is usually 18, they're going to gain control of those assets, which means they might not use the money for college. They might go and, splurge on whatever they want, since the account is now in their name. So that's a big difference too between custodial accounts and 529 plans.
Katie, I think we had some questions come in so far and some of the subjects you talked of. If your questions aren't being answered right now, it's likely because it's going to be answered later in the presentation. But we had a question come in, does that K through 12 qualified expenses for a 529 plan include any club fees when kids join school, especially after hours like robotics, or is it just tuition?
No, for the 529 plan qualified expenses for K through 12, it is just tuition expenses.
And yeah, that's about it right now. The rest of these questions will be answered later in the presentation.
Okay, great. We've got one more quick slide on 529 plans and K through 12, since we often get a lot of questions about this. As I mentioned, so you can use your 529 plan to pay for up to $10,000 per year per beneficiary for private school tuition. And in a lot of cases, private school tuition is very expensive, so that is a significant amount. But we just want to advise you to use caution, because one of the biggest advantages of using a 529 plan is the federal tax-free compounding. So if you're going to withdraw funds early from your 529 plan to pay for K through 12, you'll miss out on some of that federal tax-free growth. So if you want to use a 529 to pay for K through 12, there are some benefits still. You can save money on your federal taxes, of course, in that short time period. And then in some states, you may also qualify for an additional state income tax break. So what we would suggest or recommend is that you open a separate account for your K through 12 saving, and make sure to select a conservative investment option to fit that shorter investing time horizon. Again, some states will offer a state income tax deduction or state tax credit when you use your 529 to pay for K through 12, but some states do not. So it's very important to check with your state's rules before making any assumptions. If your state does offer a state tax benefit, that's great, but again, just consider having a separate account to save for K through 12. Were there any questions on that, Matt?
Nope, just some more questions. Some really good questions coming in, but a lot of stuff that, once again, we'll be covering in the next couple of slides.
Okay, great. Then I'm going to hand it over to you to start talking about a little bit more about 529 plans.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Katie. So first, I think it's important that we get an understanding of 529 plan basics, what they are, how they work, what kinds there are, et cetera, and that will help lay the groundwork for selecting a 529 plan, which I'll cover later. So the first things first, what is a 529 plan? So these are essentially government-created investment vehicles that help families set aside money for future educational expenses. And it used to be just college, but as Katie went over, we now have K through 12 tuition as well. And the way they work is kind of like an opposite 401k, right? And what I mean by that is that post-tax dollars are going to go into this account, not pre-tax dollars. So post-tax dollars go in. Those monies are invested within different investment vehicles, and we'll get into those in a little bit. And then your earnings grow tax-deferred and are eventually tax-free when used to pay for qualified educational expenses that Katie had just went over. And once again, to make the distinction between K through 12 being just tuition and higher education being tuition, fees, room and boards, computers, etc. So we had Greg ask a question before the webinar, which was, are there any advantages to using a 529 plan over simply investing in the stock market? Well, as I just said, one huge advantage right there is that you are completely getting rid of that capital gains tax, right, when you're using it for qualified education expenses. So you're going to be, not paying that 15% capital gains, or if you're in the privileged position, that 20% capital gains for some of the higher tax brackets. So there's over 95 529 plans across 49 states. The only state that does not have at least one is the state of Wyoming. There are a few that have residency requirements, and what I mean by that is it's restricted to only residents of that state. One example being the South Carolina Future Scholar 529 plan. But other than that, as an investor, you are able to open up any of these plans, right? So you can live in Florida, you can open up a California 529 plan, and then your child can go to school in New York. All of them are going to have different characteristics. They're going to have different investment vehicles. They're going to have different fees. They're going to have different historical performance, et cetera. So they're all very unique in the way they operate. Most of the time, the states will partner with a large financial institution, and these are going to be the big names that you've kind of heard of before that you can see at the bottom here, the Vanguards, Ascensus, Fidelities, T. Rowe Prices of the world. So when you are investing within investment options, if the state has partnered, it's usually going to be with investment products from one of these large program managers. And then those plan managers are actually going to be the ones holding your funds. Katie, do we have any questions about any of that, this kind of like baseline information before we keep going?
Yeah, we have a really interesting question from Alma. She's asking if you can go over the difference between 401ks and 529 plans again. Maybe just a quick sentence or two, because I think that's probably a question many people have and probably seems obvious to us, but.
Right. So a 401k is obviously offered through your employer. So in order to open one up, your employer needs to be offering one. And the main difference between the two is that of the way that the taxes operate. So when you are contributing to a 401k plan, you are contributing to it with pre-tax money, means that the taxes have not already been paid on it. And then when you remove that money from the account later, that's when you're paying taxes. With a 529 plan, the taxes have already been paid on it. So it's just like if you went out and bought a cup of coffee at Starbucks with that same type of money, after tax money goes into that 529 plan. And then if you contribute, let's say $10,000 total to your 529 plan, and then when your child goes to college, that account is worth $20,000. That $10,000 worth of gains is going to be completely tax-free. So it's kind of the opposite the way that the taxes work between a 529 plan and a 401k.
Okay. And then really quick, someone asked, can there be more than one 529 in the same or different states for the same beneficiary?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a pretty good strategy for some folks. We'll go over the tax benefits, the state tax benefits that are offered in the next slide. But let's say your state's giving you a maximum of $2,000 in a state tax deduction, but you're contributing more to that a year. You may want to just contribute $2,000 total in your state's plan and then open up an out-of-state plan and put the remainder of your contributions into it. So absolutely, you can have multiple 529 plans for the same beneficiary. That is a little opposite from a question we saw earlier, where can you have multiple beneficiaries in the same 529 plan? That's not the case. You should be opening up multiple 529 plans for multiple beneficiaries.
Okay.
All right, great. Let's keep going here. So let's go over some of the great benefits. I know Katie alluded to some of them a little bit earlier, but I think there's some things about 529 plans that people aren't completely aware of. So the first is going to be the tax benefits. So I had already went over kind of the federal tax benefits of not paying those capital gains tax or normal income taxes on all the gains within the account. But in addition to that, over 30 states offer an additional state tax deduction or credit for your contributions every year. And we're going to go to that in a little bit more detail, in a little bit. Crowdfunding. So another difference, we just had a question about the 401k plan. Another difference here is that in a 401k plan, only you or your employer can contribute to that account. With a 529 plan, you can actually crowdfund your education, meaning that anyone can contribute directly to that account. It's a great way to kind of jumpstart your savings and get some extra money around birthdays, holidays, graduations, etc. Most of the plans have some sort of online portal where friends and family can contribute to it. Some of them do still require that you have to send in a check with perhaps the account number or the beneficiary name, etc. But regardless, you can always ask friends and family to help contribute to your child's education. Next, flexibility. And I know we always have a few questions about this. So 529 plans are actually a pretty versatile investment product. You can change your 529 plan once every rolling 12 months. So if you're not happy with your state's plan or you're not happy with the plan you're in, 12 months after you open it up, you can go ahead and roll over those assets from your current plan to a new 529 plan. In addition, you can change your investment option twice every calendar year. So it's not like trading in the normal stock market where you can just buy and sell, et cetera, et cetera. You are restricted in changing your investment options, but you do have the option. Let's say you're invested in an aggressive portfolio and you think there's going to be a market downturn, you can actually take that money and put it into a super conservative portfolio, and you can do that twice a calendar year. I'm sure there's 5 or 10 questions within our Q&A right now about what if my kid doesn't go to school? What if he gets a scholarship, et cetera? Good news, still versatile in that regard. So if your child gets a scholarship, you can remove the amount of the scholarship from your 529 plan penalty-free. If your child doesn't end up going to college, you have a few options. You can rename the beneficiary to any qualified family member, which is a pretty wide net. Nieces, nephews, stepchildren. You can rename yourself the beneficiary, and if you want to go back and get some schooling. In addition, there's no kind of time limit on when those funds need to be used. So you can just leave those for potentially grandchildren down the road and have a nice chunk of change for your grandchildren when they eventually go to college. But if you have no reason for the money to be in there, your children don't go to school, no additional beneficiaries, you can make what's known as a non-qualified withdrawal. And the way that works is that just the earnings portion, never the principal, which is the amount you contributed, just the earnings portion will be subject to income taxes as well as a 10% penalty, which is very similar to removing money from a Roth IRA before you're 59 and a half. Next, no income restrictions. It doesn't matter how much or how little you make. There's no income phase outs like with some other investment vehicles. Anyone and everyone can use a 529 plan. Next, minimal financial aid impact. I'm not going to get too much into this because Katie's going to discuss it a little bit later. But there's actually, when you're filling out that FAFSA, you get very favorable treatment, the money in a 529 plan compared to other assets and other places where that money could be living. And lastly, high contribution limits. So most of the plans you can contribute in excess of $400,000 to, which usually covers the cost of both undergrad and a graduate school within that state. There's always one question, and Prakash asked it before the webinar had started. Is there a limit to the amount we can deposit when we contribute to a 529 plan? So as I said, the limits are up to about $400,000. The only thing you really need to consider is contributions without any kind of tax implications. And what I mean by that is that you can contribute every year $15,000 if you're a single filer and $30,000 if you're married filing jointly to the plan without any tax consequences. Anything above that is going to reduce your lifetime gift tax exemption, which is about a little excess of $11 million right now. But there's one small thing that people should know about if you are in the privileged position to be able to do so. You can choose to do 5 years worth of those contributions at once without any tax implications. So that means $75,000 for single filers and $150,000 for families married filing jointly. So once again, another great versatile option when it comes to a 529 plan. So we kind of went through a lot there. Katie, let me stop and see if we had any questions before we keep going.
Yeah, we have a lot of really great questions. I kind of narrowed it down to 3 that I thought would help the audience the most. So first, someone asked if you can withdraw contributions only, like a Roth IRA.
No, so that's never going to be the case. So whenever you remove money from a 529 plan, it's going to be a balance between the percentage of your current contributions, aka your principal, and the amount of gains within the account. So it doesn't work like a Roth IRA when you can specify just removing your contributions so far. Okay,
and then what about where you can use the 529 plan funds? We had a question, can you use them for a school outside of the US? Can you use them for a trade school?
Yeah, so you can use a 529 plan at nearly every accredited institution in the United States. You can use it for trade schools and vocational schools. And you can choose about between 400 colleges overseas. So there is a great tool on savingforcollege.com that lets you search for specific institutions to see if that 529 plan is 529 plan eligible.
Okay, and then lastly, I had more than one question regarding twins. and how to save in a 529 plan for children that are going to be going to college at the same time.
Yeah, so great. If you do have twins, it is a unique situation because you're going to have the same investment horizon, obviously. But regardless, even if you want to just contribute, double the amount to a single 529 plan, regardless, when you remove money from that account to use for each child, you have to specify a named beneficiary. So you can start off with one if you want to, but when you go to withdraw that money, you're going to have to start a second account and roll over some of the assets from your current 529 plan to a 529 plan in the other beneficiary's name. So if you want to handle that later, that's fine. But like everything else in life, it's usually good to get rid of the pain early and just open up 2 529 plans at that point in time. All right, great. Let's get going. So, people always ask me when's the best time to start saving in a 529 plan for my child, and my answer is always the earlier the better. I'm sure everyone's kind of heard the term that compound interest is your best friend. Just looking at this chart, we're talking about a $40,000 difference if you're between 6 years, if you're putting in $200 a month. So it really does add up getting started earlier. So remember, you can always change the amount you're putting into your account. So even if you can just open an account up with $50 right now and put in money while you can, or just open it up at $25 a month, and when your financial situation changes, you can put more in. You are allowed to change the amount that you're putting in. Just get started the earliest that you can. But there are some scenarios where you may be saying, oh, my child's just about to go to school, or my child is currently in school. There's still a lot of benefits that you can have. So if you are getting a little bit of a late start, there's some plans like the ones offered from College Savings Bank that Katie spoke about earlier. They offer FDIC insured or certificate of deposit accounts. So these type of accounts are ideal for families whose children are about to go to college, people saving for K through 12 because we mentioned the short time horizon earlier, grandparents who may be a little bit more conservative, or just conservative investors in general. And what they allow you to do is to protect your principal college savings investment, so you're not going to be, worrying about the stock market taking a downturn or not being invested in a right portfolio. So it allows you to protect your principal and still takes advantage of tax benefits. Because as I said, over 30 states are, offering some sort of additional state tax deduction or credit. So open one up. If your state's giving you a $10,000 deduction, your child's going to school in a year, get a 1-year CD, put $10,000 in, take a $10,000 state tax deduction right off your taxes that year, and also maybe get a 2% return. So you are limiting your upside, but you are preserving your principal investment. However, make sure that you choose the right time horizon, because CDs could be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and there is going to be a penalty if you remove the money before that term is done. So please be aware of that. So anything else before we go into what a lot of people always worried about, Katie, in selecting a 529 plan?
No, I think we were good to move on.
All right, great. So tons of questions about this, and I get why. Nobody wants to make the wrong decision. Everybody wants to be, maximizing every dollar that they put in. It's very difficult to navigate these 529 plan waters, but let's take a look at what you should keep in mind when you're selecting a 529 plan. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we are going to have to choose the type of plan that we want. Their 529 plan world is really kind of split into two types of plans. The first one is the prepaid 529 plan. Only about a dozen or so states offer these types of plans. And if you live in a state, I'm sure you've heard about it. The pitch is, quote unquote, lock in tomorrow's tuition at today's rates. Let's be aware that that's not exactly true. You're always going to be paying a slightly inflated rate, or like a premium on today's tuition rates, but it is a viable option for a lot of parents. And then if your state doesn't offer a prepaid 529 plan, you can always invest in the private tuition 529 plan, which operates the same way and has about 300 schools around the country underneath its umbrella. So Lisa asked, how are prepaid savings valued if a student goes to college out of state? Because these prepaid plans are tied to in-state tuition. Well, each plan is a little bit different. However, the way many of them work is that they pay out an amount equal to the weighted average tuition and contractually specified fees at your state's public institutions, not to exceed the actual tuition and fees that you incur. So this causes a little bit of uncertainty, right? Depending on the type of college that your child goes to, you may have a little bit too much, you may have a little too little. And what I mean by that is that, for example, I live in Florida, and Florida has this great thing called the Florida Prepaid Plan. However, for residents, Florida colleges are, one, very good, and two, very, very cheap. So if I were to open one up for my non-existent child, and then they ended up getting into Harvard, for example, and didn't have a full scholarship, I would have been saving for a type of school that is much, much cheaper than Harvard is. So I'm going to have this huge, huge college savings gap when it's time to pay tuition. So one viable option is to open up your state's prepaid plan and also supplement it with a 529 savings plan. And speaking of those, let's talk a little bit about the 529 savings plans. So this is what most people think of when they think of a 529 plan. And what I talked about earlier, you're putting post-tax dollars in, it's invested in the stock market, and your account goes up and down as your investment goes. And then these are divided into two separate ones, broker sold and direct sold 529 plans. So direct sold 529 plans, you can open it up yourself. You can go to savingforcollege.com, browse a little bit, research some plans, click open this plan, and then go and open that 529 plan all by yourself. An advisor sold plan, you need a financial advisor. These plans usually come with higher fees on average, but they do have more investment options to choose from. So if you are maybe a more savvy investor that wants to build a customized portfolio, you want to do small, mid, large cap and get some domestic and foreign equity into your portfolio, it may be worth it to speak with an advisor and open up an advisor sold plan. So anything on this, Katie, before we talk about the state tax incentives?
Really quick, I just want to mention our website again because someone, I think, typed in the wrong spelling. We are savingforcollege.com. So saving is singular, no S after the G. So savingforcollege.com, where you can find plenty of articles and content related to what we are talking about today.
All right, great. So let's talk, the next step that we should really do after we decided what type of plan we're going to be opening up is going to be checking their state tax incentives. A question that Frederick had was, is there any advantage to investing within the 529 plan offered in my home state? And obviously there definitely could be. Over 30 states, and you can see this on the map right here, have a state tax deduction or credit for contributing to a 529 plan. However, just like everything else with 529 plans, Katie, it's not really that simple. So you can see here all the states that have some sort of incentive. However, in most of these states, you only get that incentive if you open up your in-state plan. So if you live in New York or if you live in Illinois, you're going to be getting a very generous state tax deduction, but you have to open up your state's plan. If you go invest outside of it, you're going to be foregoing that deduction. There's a few great states, Arizona, Arkansas, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, and Pennsylvania. These are what's known as tax parity states. And if you live there, very lucky for you, you can open up any 529 plan from across the country and still get a state tax deduction. So you can live in Pennsylvania, open up the New York plan or the California plan, the Utah plan, and still take a state tax deduction every year. Well, one thing I will say, and then someone I think had a question when we first opened up about Oklahoma, sometimes what these plans do is that they offer a state tax deduction and then they offset that by charging higher fees every year. And it's something to be careful of because that state tax deduction is going to be very stagnant. So if you're contributing, let's say $1,000 a year, that might equate to $50 that you're going to be getting every year depending on your state tax bracket. And that's going to stay pretty stagnant over the course of your investment. The fees are going to be based on your account balance. So as that gets larger and larger and larger, you're going to be paying more and more and more in fees. So just keep a lookout. We do have a great fee score that you can see in each one of the plans on savingforcollege.com. So keep an eye out on the type of fees that you're paying when you're opening up your plan. Just don't blindly invest within your state just because you're getting a state tax deduction. So any questions on the state tax deductions, Katie?
Yes, a little bit earlier, someone had asked a question regarding whether or not you can claim a state tax deduction like who can claim the state tax deduction? Does it have to be the parent? Could it be a grandparent contributing? Does it have to be the account owner?
So that's going to vary state by state, and definitely something you'll want to check out. Most of the time it's going to be the account owner that has to be contributing. However, there are going to be a few states where anyone can contribute to their 529 plan and still get that deduction. So it could be any taxpayer. So if grandma and grandpa live in that state, they can also do it. So keep an eye out from that, because if grandparents are going to be contributing, if they're still paying income taxes, they may live in a state by themselves where they're getting a state tax deduction, and they may want to open up their own. So definitely something to keep a lookout, and great question there. All right, next, something to research and compare. A site that savingforcolleges.com is great for. The first thing you should look out for is that plan manager that I spoke about earlier. Are they well known? Are they going to be around for a while? These plan managers, they have contracts with the state. So you may wake up one day and there's a completely different program manager with a completely different set of fees, investment options, et cetera. So keep a lookout for a strong plan manager. Next, a pretty obvious one, fees. You don't want to have to pay a lot if you don't have to. So fees can vary widely. One plan can have over 10 times the cost of another plan, and that can significantly eat into your account balance. So keep an eye out for that. Next, investment options. Does the plan offer a wide range of investment options? If I'm a conservative investor, does that plan offer an FDIC insured or a CD product like from College Savings Bank we talked about earlier? How risky should my portfolio be? Is my child close to college? Am I saving for K through 12? You want to align your portfolio with both your investment horizon and your own tolerance for risk. And lastly, another pretty obvious one, performance. Better returns mean more money in your account. So keep an eye on how that plan has performed over different kind of time periods, 1, 3, 5, 10-year periods. So if you need help with all of this and don't know where to go to see all of this kind of stuff in one place, just head on over to savingforcollege.com. You can see the actual spelling down there. Check out our 5-cap ratings, check out our comparison tools. So if you need some help with that, you know where to go.
And then, Matt, a few people asked about how they can get specific information about the plan's fees and the fee scores that we assign.
Yeah, you could just go to savingforcollege.com. There's a few different ways to get to that information. You can just click on our state map, click on your state. You can go through, you can compare up to 3 plans. So if there's 3 plans you like, but if you go into the plan details of the actual plan on our site, we'll have everything from the investment performance for all the portfolios. You can see all the fee scores right there, the performance scores, those contracts that I talked about. All that information is centrally located for you right on our site.
Great.
So lastly is choosing an investment option. So there's a few factors to consider here, and we can see that at the top. The type of investment option, we'll go over that in a little bit. The fees, your risk tolerance that I talked about earlier. Some portfolios are very aggressive, some are very conservative. Make sure you choose one that fits your comfort for risk. And as I said, your investment horizon. How long is it going to be until I'm going to tap this account and have to pay K through 12 tuition or college expenses? If your child's 2 years away from college, you likely don't want to be in a portfolio that's 100% invested in equities. Maybe there's a market downturn and you lose 30% of your account. That could really throw off your college planning. So keep that in mind. So I wanted to go over the different types of investment options. So the first one is going to be what's known as a static investment option. These portfolios have a very specific investment objective, and their asset allocation will not change over time. So if that portfolio that you invest in is invested in 75% equities and 25% bonds, this is not going to change no matter how old your child gets or how close your child gets to college. Next is going to be an age-based portfolio. So age-based investment options automatically become more conservative as your child gets closer to college. So your portfolio may be 100% invested in equities when he or she is a newborn, and then 10 to 18% in equities by the time your child is about to attend college. So these are very, very popular among parents. They help kind of automatically account for risk and investment horizon over time. However, keep a lookout because many plans these days have more than what's known as a track. So there may be an aggressive, moderate, and conservative track. So a conservative track might start at 60% and end at 0% in equities. An aggressive track may start at 100% and end at 30% in equities. So once again, align it to your risk tolerance when you're choosing those portfolios. And then lastly, on the next slide is FDIC insured products. So we went over these a little bit earlier. These are, as I spoke of, typically made up of low-risk investments such as savings accounts or certificates of deposits. The investment options kind of guarantee you a rate of return for a certain period of time. You're going to get a little bit of larger return for a larger time period. And as I said, an ideal type of investment option for families whose children are about to go to college, K through 12, grandparents, conservative investors, etc. But once again, be very wary if this is something that you're interested in, because not all 529 plans are going to have this option available. You're going to have to find a 529 plan like the ones that College Savings Bank has partnered with that offer FDIC insured options. It's actually something that you can find on savingforcollege.com. You can go to compare 529 plans and click on FDIC insured or CD options, and we'll show you all the plans that have these options available. So I just want people to keep that in mind. So Katie, any questions before I turn it back over to you here to talk about withdrawing your plan and financial aid and all that good stuff?
Just one more quick question about fees related to investment options. Ron asked if age-based portfolios tend to have higher fees than static portfolios.
It really depends on the plan. So for example, a plan like the New York 529 plan, a great 529 plan, every single investment option within that 529 plan is going to have the same exact fee, which is great. It makes it very easy. Some plans are going to have, for the aggressive track, maybe a little bit more expensive than the conservative track. So once again, that's why we have all this great information available at savingforcollege.com, because everything really does vary plan to plan. And as I said, it's not just state to state. A state may have 3 or 4 different 529 plans, and they're all going to be very different. So definitely keep an eye out and do your research.
Okay. Then moving on, I'll take it from here, and we're going to talk about 529 plans and financial aid. So many people are worried that if they save in a 529 plan, their child is going to get less financial aid. And it's true that your 529 plan will affect college financial aid, but the impact is very limited, and it's going to vary depending on who the account owner is. So we're going to focus on federal financial aid during this presentation, federal need-based financial aid, because the rules for institutional student aid is going to vary by college. But all college students are going to be filling out the FAFSA, hopefully. So we'll talk about the 529 plan's effect on that. So a student's expected family contribution, the EFC, determines how much financial aid they're eligible to receive. And the EFC is a measure of the family's financial strength. It's the amount the student is expected to be able to pay for college out of pocket based on their family's financial circumstances. The EFC is based on information provided on the student's FAFSA, and the calculation considers the student income and assets and the parent's income and assets. Now, what's important to know is that the student's income and assets has a greater impact on financial aid than the parent's income and assets. So, which is why we say, and it's true, that 529 plans receive what's called favorable treatment on the FAFSA. Because a 529 plan account, whether it's owned by a parent or a dependent student, is always considered a parent asset. And parent assets are treated differently than student assets. So, I know earlier in the presentation, someone had asked, what's the difference between having a mutual fund or a 529 plan, savings for college, in regards to financial aid? Well, it depends on who owns the mutual fund. If it's a student asset, a student-owned mutual fund, 20% of the value of that mutual fund is going to count against their financial aid. So, however, if it's the parent that owns the mutual fund, it's only a maximum of 5.64%. So, also, you need to keep in mind parent assets, the first $6,000 or so are going to fall under a parent asset protection allowance, and it's not going to be counted at all. And I say $6,000, that's just an estimate. The exact amount depends on the parent's age. But then, so anything above that $6,000 will be reportable. And since the maximum reportable assets, parent assets, is 5.64%, let's say there's $10,000 in reportable 529 plan assets, the college would assume that the family had $564 to pay for college. And so the student's need-based financial aid package would only be reduced by $564. So you want to compare this to the other student assets, which could be a custodial account, a mutual fund, anything like that. Those are counted at 20%. So with those accounts, $10,000 in one of those accounts means $2,000 less in aid. So another thing to keep in mind, I think we may have gotten this question earlier as well, is that since 529 plans are reported as a parent asset, that means a sibling's 529 plan assets will also be counted. However, assets in a sibling's custodial 529 plan are not counted on the FAFSA. So that's one little, you have to think about that as well. But remember, this is after the asset protection allowance, and it's only a maximum of 5.64% of the assets. But the biggest advantage of using a 529 plan in regards to financial aid is that qualified distributions are excluded from federal income tax and are not reported on the FAFSA at all, as long as the account is owned by a parent or dependent student. So this is also an advantage of using a 529 plan over something like a Roth IRA, because assets in the Roth are not reported on the FAFSA since it's a retirement account, but the distributions used to pay for college will be counted as income on the FAFSA, and income is counted at up to 50% of the distribution. So that is how the 529 plans receive favorable treatment. Do we have any questions on that, Matt?
No, it seems like there were some questions that were rolling in, but you covered it as you were going along.
Okay, great. So next we're going to move on and talk about grandparent 529s. And this follows the financial aid slide mainly because if a grandparent owns a 529 plan, it's going to have, the 529 plan will be treated differently on the FAFSA. And this is important to know. So distributions, well, let's talk about when the assets are held in a grandparent-owned 529 account. And it's really not just a grandparent-owned. This could be anyone other than a parent. So if it's an aunt, uncle, family friend, if you have a 529 for the child that's not your dependent, the assets will not be reported on that child's FAFSA as long as they are still held in the account. However, once you take a distribution to pay for that child's college, it's going to be counted as student income. So what that means is that a $10,000 payment for a grandchild's college could reduce need-based financial aid eligibility by as much as $5,000. So that's a huge hit compared to if the parent owned the account. But however, there are some pros for a grandparent owning the account. If a grandparent wants to open an account for a grandchild, they'll just need their social security number. If it's a child that isn't born yet, the grandparent can use their own social security number and change the beneficiary later when the child's born. The benefits to having it in a grandparent's name are that the grandparent is going to retain control of the account and can take the money back if needed. So unlike a custodial account, which we talked about earlier, where the child, once they turn 18 or reach legal age, they can go ahead and take that money and use it for whatever they want. The account owner of a 529 plan retains control of the assets. So a grandparent might like that. They might change their mind and want to give the money to a different grandchild. They might need it for a medical emergency. No matter the reason, some grandparents want to have that control. Then also they may qualify for a state income tax deduction. As Matt mentioned before, this varies by state, but in some states you must be the account owner in order to be eligible for that state income tax deduction. So grandparents want to keep that in mind. Also, 529 contributions will be removed from your taxable estate. Grandparents who are doing some estate planning and want to move large amounts from their estate, they can take advantage of that 5-year superfunding rule with 529 plans and remove large amounts from their taxable estate. And then again, as I mentioned, the assets while they're held in the account are not reported on the FAFSA. Any questions on that, Matt?
Yeah, I think there was just a little bit of confusion. Maybe if you can just go over the high-level points real quickly about the parent versus grandparent and how it's a little bit different.
Right. So the biggest differences are when the assets are held in the account. So when you're saving for college and you have a 529 plan, the money in the account, if it's owned by a parent, the maximum amount that it's counted for on the FAFSA is 5.64%. Grandparent-owned accounts are not counted at all when the money is left in the account. But the biggest difference is when you go to take a distribution, you withdraw the money to pay for college. When a parent does that, there's no effect. Nothing is reported on the FAFSA. But when a grandparent takes the distribution, it's going to be counted as student income on the FAFSA. It is money that's helping the student pay for college. So a college sees that as available funds to pay for college, and they're going to count that as up to 50% of the amount of the distribution. So as I mentioned, if you're a grandparent and you have a grandparent-owned 529 plan, you withdraw $10,000 to pay for your grandchild's college, it might reduce their need-based financial aid eligibility by $5,000. There are a few workarounds to that situation so that grandparents can still enjoy the benefits of having their own 529 plan. One thing they can do is they can wait until January 1st of the child's sophomore year of college to pay tuition. That works if the grandchild is graduating in 4 years. If they're graduating in 5 years, you would take the distribution after January 1st of the student's junior year. And that's because the FAFSA looks at income from 2 years prior. So by second semester of that sophomore or junior year, you should be in the clear to start taking distributions that will not affect the student's financial aid. Or of course, the grandparent can change the account owner to a parent if the plan permits so, or they can, another option is wait until after the student graduates and help them pay down their student loans. However, if the grandparent chooses this option, paying down student loans is considered a non-qualified withdrawal, so there will be income tax and a penalty owed on the earnings in that account. So I think most grandparents would probably prefer to either wait to start helping to pay for college until it won't affect the FAFSA anymore, or maybe just go ahead and change the account owner to a parent or make contributions to a parent-owned account. Hopefully that clears it up.
Great, Katie. That's great.
Okay, and then finally, the last few minutes, we'll talk about 529 plan withdrawals. So when it's time to pay for college, how do you go about taking the money out without getting hit with those taxes and penalties? So there's a few quick steps you can follow to make sure you take out the right amount of money. So the first is going to be calculate your qualified expenses. So what you want to do is go through and see how much you spent on college this year for your child, and we'll go into that in the next slide about the specific things to look for. And then step 2, determine when to withdraw. Distributions should be taken in the same year which the qualified expenses were paid. So for example, make sure you don't include second semester tuition expenses that were paid in December of the previous year. So you want to make sure that the expenses are paid in the same year you take that distribution. And then step 3, decide which account to withdraw from. So maybe you have multiple 529 plans for the same child. Maybe each set of grandparents has a 529 plan and a parent has a 529 plan. You want to coordinate with the other people who have those accounts because, well, first of all, you want to make sure that you're not taking distributions to pay for the same qualified expenses, because then one of those distributions is going to be considered non-qualified. And then I'm also taking those financial aid rules into consideration. It might be smart to go ahead and withdraw from the parent-owned accounts first and then save the grandparent accounts until they will no longer affect financial aid. And then what you want to do is visit your plan's website to complete a withdrawal request. This is usually pretty straightforward. You'll probably get to decide if you want to do a partial withdrawal, if it's just to pay for 1 year of college. If you're all done with college, you can do a full withdrawal. You can also select which portfolio you want to withdraw from, but that should be pretty straightforward and available on your plan's website. And then, so how much to withdraw? So you want to go ahead and calculate your qualified expenses, which I mentioned before. And so you'll start with adding up your qualified education expenses. So that's going to include college tuition, fees, books, supplies, computers, including internet access and software, room and board costs, as long as the student is enrolled at least half-time and pursuing a degree or a certificate program. And then also that $10,000 in K through 12 tuition. Once you have that number, be sure you do not go ahead and take a distribution, because what you have to do next is make sure to subtract any tax-free educational assistance. And that's going to include tax-free scholarships, employer-paid tuition, or veterans educational assistance. And then step 3, it says step 2, it should be step 3, subtract any amount used to generate the American Opportunity Tax Credit. And that's going to be a maximum $4,000. And it's important to go ahead and subtract these amounts because there is no double dipping with these tax benefits, the tax benefits of 529 plans, and also the American Opportunity Tax Credit, the Lifetime Learning Credit, any of these tax-free assistance. And then if you have any leftover funds, it depends on what the leftover funds are for. If you have leftover funds because your child received a scholarship or maybe decided to attend a U.S. military academy, what you can go ahead and do is you can take a non-qualified distribution up to the amount of the tax-free scholarship, but you will still owe ordinary income tax on the earnings. What will happen is that 10% penalty fee will be waived. So I know a lot of people ask what happens if you get a scholarship. It's really not that big of a deal. What just happens is that your tax advantage investment now becomes a taxable investment. If you just have leftover funds in the account because your child doesn't go to college, I think we talked about this before, you have the opportunity to change the beneficiary to someone that will attend college, any qualifying family member. That could be a sibling, niece, nephew, spouse, just about anyone who is your family member, and the IRS has a list of those qualifying family members. Or you can save the funds for a future grandchild. You can use it for your own continuing education. You want to take a night class at community college, something like that, as long as it's an eligible institution, it'll work for that. And then, or, if all else fails, you can always withdraw the money to spend it however you want and just be subject to, the income tax and the penalty on the earnings. And with that, I think that's all we have for today. So Matt, if there's any final questions, we have a few minutes, probably we can answer those.
Yeah, real quickly, I know some people had said, it seems like I was just checking the chat instead of the Q&A, about that the ratings are a little bit too broad on saving for college. Those are simply the 5-cap ratings that look at the plan as a whole. For those who are looking for more granular information, go into the actual plan details itself, and you'll see a tab called Investment Options. This will have information on every single investment option, not just the target date funds. You can see how those funds compare to other similar funds. You can see how, much like Morningstar, the growth of $10,000, how the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year performance compares to similar type of investment vehicles. So there is much more granular information, not just that best 529 plans page. Let's see. Other than that,
I'll take a quick one.
Okay, great.
Just because I think it's confusion on something that I said. Someone is asking, I know I mentioned that you can withdraw up to the amount of a tax-free scholarship, and then on the slide it says to subtract scholarships, and that's because the slide is referring to calculating a tax-free withdrawal. But if you withdraw the amount of a scholarship, you will still have to pay income tax, ordinary income tax on the amount. The penalty will be waived. So I hope that's clear that the slide was referring to how to get that tax-free penalty-free withdrawal.
And let's be clear again that the income tax is on the earnings portion of the 529 plan. Right.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, other than that, it looks like it's 2 o'clock. Once again, apologies if we did not get to everyone's question. We do the best we can with a few hundred participants, but I hope everyone learned something today. And thank you, everyone, for coming out.
Yep, thank you.
And yes, a recording of the webinar will be sent out as well with a feedback kind of questionnaire. So everyone will be receiving a link to the recording.
Okay, thanks again, everyone.